Hi everyone, is this working? Yes. My name's Kate Beecroft. I'm the ecosystem lead for DAOstack, and I'm going to be moderating this panel today. So we have Jake on my left here, who is the co-founder of CoinFund. Would you like to do a really quick intro, Jake?
Sure. So I'm the founder of CoinFund. My background's in mathematics, computer science. CoinFund has been a very early crypto-focused fund in the US. As it relates to DAO space, I'm originally an advisor to the Aragon project and have been working pretty actively, just kind of following the DAO space this year and trying to see where it goes.
Great. Now we have Luke, who's the co-founder of the Caribbean DAO.
Yeah, so I'm the co-founder of the Caribbean Blockchain Network. It's a network for Caribbean blockchain enthusiasts and professionals. And I'm also the co-founder of CuraDAO, which is a DAO in a small island in the Caribbean called Curacao, and we're trying to create a community-driven sustainable development DAO.
Great. And we have Nathan Schneider to my left here, who's been very involved in many kind of peer economy research articles from the New School in New York. So it's an honor to see you again here. Nathan, a couple more words.
Yeah, sure. I'm at the University of Colorado in Boulder, and that's okay. But I've collaborated a lot with a colleague at the New School, Trevor Schultz, in developing the idea and the practice of platform cooperativism. So trying to bring the legacy of cooperative economics into the online economy. And so I've been also following the DAO space from the early days of the Ethereum white paper, trying to see how this older tradition of economic democracy can fit together with some of these new tools and opportunities.
He's fine. And we also have Michael, the founder of IKU, and you'd just tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, sure. It's actually pronounced IKU, but so it's a decentralized research organization. Just switch the A with an R. But we're working on staking and monetizing open science, and the first project that we're bringing to market is called the NeuroDAO. It's basically, we're trying to build the largest database for neuro data points, and we actually have a supplement that we're trying to fund right now to bring into market in 2 years from now. It addresses neurodegeneration in a longitudinal way, so not only Alzheimer's, but Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, and we're doing it in the context of a DRO. And yeah, exciting times.
Cool. Thanks, guys. So the reason we've kind of put this panel together to close the day is these projects are all kind of coming from not the tech comes first perspective, but real need, where the tech kind of comes second. Luke is a really good example, founding a DAO for Curacao. I'd love to just ask all of you, what are the most important aspects of what you and your peers are working on and building to push forth the decentralized governance ecosystem? Luke, if you'd like to start, that would be great.
Yeah, of course. So in our case, Curacao is not the most corrupt country, but it's quite corrupt because we're very small. It's a lot of favoritism. We only have 150,000 people living there. So it's very easy that the prime minister is your cousin or something. Also, half of the non-profit organizations funded by the government don't submit a balance sheet at the end of the year. So there's a lot of money just disappearing, while also our unemployment rate went from 13 to 21%. So there's a real need for these funds. So in the beginning, our goal would be to be a better nonprofit where the decision-making and funding is transparent. And that selling point has been working the best so far.
Cool, thank you. Jake, would you like to comment?
Sure. Let me take kind of a more macro view as the, investor on the panel. So, when I think about like the practical need for DAOs, I think about the fact that we live in a world with many different jurisdictions that are tied to physical locations, while at the same time everybody is using technology that is completely global. And there is a fundamental mismatch between those two things. And so when you get into things like global commerce, trade, when you get into court cases that suddenly span many countries, these things are sort of like on the forefront of the digital issues that we deal with today. And so to me, like on a macro level, DAOs represent this huge opportunity to create a almost like global digital jurisdiction where people can transact, where people can do business, where people can, start nonprofits, where people can coordinate on problems that are bigger than, a single country, like global warming, and have a set of rules where they can do this effectively, where they can transact effectively, and where they can settle disputes. And if you look at just the dispute resolution aspect of this stuff, for example, globally, this is like a multi-trillion-dollar market. So there's a huge opportunity.
Nathan, what about you? What are the most important aspects of what you and your peers are working on to push decentralized governance forward?
I think there are a lot of ways to answer that question, but one that is kind of front of mind for me is the fate of democracy in our world. I think we're in a moment where there appears to be a declining faith or interest or in democracy as a way of accomplishing things. And at the same time, we're in a moment of kind of cascading accountability crises. And I think there's a real urgency to build democracies that are really accountable. And this kind of space is a place where we can do that. Now, one cautionary tale for me is in looking at so many of the projects in this space, when you compare them to the kinds of functioning democratic practices that have operated in kind of the meat space all around us for a long time, they're very, very thin. And I think it's really important. They're doing so little compared to what functioning governance systems historically have done. And I think it's really important to connect what we're doing in spaces like this with those legacies and draw on those legacies, to draw on the culture and the habits that are embedded in those legacies, rather than imagining that we are going to invent from scratch the governance of the future. So I think we have an opportunity to use these tools and these ideas here to iterate much, much faster, to improve on those legacies. But I don't think we're going to be able to do that unless we also learn how to draw on them.
Cool. Thanks for that provocation, Nathan. Michael, tell us a little bit about what's important for you in your project.
Yeah, I mean, creating a DRO and kind of like going after the pharmaceutical industry is a bit of a difficult task, and that comes with like understanding what is wrong with the pharmaceutical industry in terms of like how everything's kept in data silos, and then if you look at like a DRO or a DAO and what it can do in terms of like economically aligning all the parties that are trying to deliver cures and interventions to the market, it gets very, very interesting. It's never done before, and the technology has never been around before. So, like you said before, we put like the science first, try to organize, the scientist buy-in first, and then put it in the context of the DRO, and then deliver it to the market. So, those are probably the two most important things to understand with what we're doing.
Cool. So we've got quite diverse kind of players and use cases on the panel today. But I was really interested in asking each of you, is there kind of a personal experience or a life event that you are drawing on to give you kind of some energy in this fight? Because you are up against some pretty big systems, investment, redesigning an economy for an island, everything you're doing. I don't even know how to explain that. Pharmaceuticals, is there something that from your personal life that, you think back to this moment or this event and you're like, yep, I'm going to keep going? Who wants to go first?
I'll start.
Go.
For me, it's pretty personal because neurodegeneration has affected my family. So my dad died of Parkinson's, my grandmother died of Alzheimer's, and sort of serendipitously, we landed on this project with a few scientists from Harvard, UPenn, the NIH, Alzheimer's Association, all the research supporting like what we're doing. So that kind of happened like second, but first there was obviously me kind of like falling down the rabbit hole of like what Ethereum and smart contracts could do, and then that happened, and it was sort of like full circle for me. So it was sort of serendipitous.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing.
I have a family element too. got involved over the last number of years working with startups and seeing that were trying to build democratic businesses. They're owned by their users or workers and running into brick walls all over the place and just having a lot of trouble getting off the ground. And in the course of that process, I moved to Colorado, where my family, my mother's side of the family is from. And through reconnecting with them, actually started to learn how much our early family history in the United States was built through cooperative businesses. So we were brought to Colorado by a cooperative beet company to farm beets, you know, and my grandfather grew up with no electricity until the electric cooperative showed up. Over and over, our history was shaped, and our, you know, ability to survive in this place was shaped by these businesses and at scale. There's a $130 billion cooperative bank down the road from me built out of that legacy. And that is a reminder to me that when I see these activists, startups, entrepreneurs struggling, that there is a way. You know, it's been done before, and we can build that ecosystem, you know, again for the present challenges.
Great, thank you, Nathan. Luke?
I think for me, there are like two events that kind of led to me sitting here. The first one was back when I was 16. I was helping a local boot camp in Curacao to help raise children with a lot of problems at home. It wasn't kind of military style, but nice. So helping them get more motivation, more self-discipline. And that was organized by one single guy. And then I realized, like, we're such a small country. If one person sets something up, he can change an entire generation. But I always kept that idea with me, and then I got introduced to Alchemy, to Genesis Alpha. We submitted a proposal to do a research in Curacao, and we did a small innovation conference around this idea, and that went from 40 to 60 to 80 to 100 people, and then even the Prime Minister showed up because they're interested in this innovation and they're interested in alternatives. And that really confirmed for me that, hey, there is a group on the island that wants to do good things, that is willing to innovate, and they're just lacking the tools to make it happen because we don't have good banking, we don't have good governance. And I hope that DAOs can help solve these issues.
Thank you.
You know, for me, I probably a couple of things, but you know, the thing that makes me interested in investing in this space is the idea that a lot of our, or my maybe hypothesis that a lot of our social issues that we have in our societies around the world can be solved through giving people economic opportunities to, you know, to create companies, to get jobs, to earn a living, you know, by doing something online in a global way. You know, I keep thinking, like, when I was graduating high school about 20 years ago, it was like really expensive to start a company, probably like hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? To start a company today is probably a couple of $100s. And to start a company, you know, using a blockchain technology such as DAOs, eventually it would be like a few cents. And to me, that represents like huge progress in the direction of, again, creating these economic opportunities. The other thing that drives me is what I perceive around the world to be sort of a failure of our legacy technology, meaning the technology of government, the technology of how do you create a company, how do you, again, resolve disputes among companies. Just a failure of all those systems to keep up with our rate of technological development and innovation. Like the idea that, I mean, like in the US, we have kind of 3 levels of government, right? Federal, state, local. But you can even take that further. You know, you can imagine having a DAO that represents you. You can have a DAO that represents the building in which you live, the block upon which your building sits, your city, you know, then your state, and so on and so forth. And it seems like when you get that kind of granularity, when you have the power to solve problems a lot more locally, you don't disenfranchise sort of as many people, and you create like much more effective impact. And so those kinds of ideas, I don't know if they're real. I think this is an experiment, but I'm willing, like as an investor, I'm willing to bet that some of this will benefit society.
Great. And invitation to all of you as well. Consider a moment or a life event that actually brought you into this room to be working on some of this stuff, which is kind of radical, some of it. But my next question, and you started us off well there, Jake, kind of to the panelists, is what roles do DAOs play in your personal kind of vision for a better, more, was it thriving future, Felipe? So yeah, just Luke or Michael or Nathan?
So in my vision, the players are there on the island, just the ground layer, so the trust, the governance, it's not optimal by far. So the DAOs are kind of our foundation to work on, and everything after that will be done outside of the DApp and the voting and stuff. But it's really the lowest layer, so the finance and the governance that we would need.
Cool.
Let's go.
So in your future, another publication, perhaps?
I don't know. I think these can be vehicles for introducing greater flexibility. I mean, right now, like when I, for instance, was at a meeting of executives at credit unions from across the United States, right? They're working with pretty cookie-cutter organizations structured by laws defined about a century ago. They are struggling to keep up with regulations and struggling to keep up with all their big bank competitors and fintech and all this stuff. They don't have the space, oftentimes, to imagine different ways of interrelating. They've come to focus, like the banks around them, on vertical relationships between the institution and the individual, and they've forgotten that their original power was in the ability to create lateral relationships among members. I think DAOs can create space in those kinds of frameworks or outside of those kinds of frameworks. I think both, where we can rediscover the power of those kinds of lateral relationships and unlock value, unlock power that we otherwise don't have. Collective power, I think, is a really important frame that is often missing from these conversations. You know, when you look at economic trends, and certainly in the United States, it's very clear. The spiraling of economic inequality has been exacerbated. Always pretty bad, but exacerbated by the decline in union membership, right? Because that was one form of collective power. So that's another piece that I hope these kinds of technologies can contribute, create real counterpower among ordinary people that it ensures that they benefit from the value that they're creating.
So just one follow-up question to that. So could DAOs to you kind of become, the new trade unions, or what is missing for us to take that leap for DAOs to actually represent working people, for them to make decisions on the organization they're working in? What's missing in your eyes?
There's a long way between here and there.
Mm-hmm.
Look at most DAOs and who's on it, us, if that, right? I mean, the accessibility is an issue. The regulatory situation is an issue. Powerful unions often depend to some significant degree on the right kind of regulations. And one thing that concerns me a great deal is also the tendency of our DAO imagination to kind of be bounded by replicating pre-1929 stock markets, right? Rather than thinking about replicating pre-1938 labor unions, which were very powerful, dynamic organizations. So I think there's a long way to go between here and there. And one of the things that's so exciting about this space is how much you can do with these tools. What's been kind of disappointing to me is the range of opportunities that have actually been explored.
Thanks, Nathan. the question for you, what does a DAO future look like for you personally?
I'm a bit cynical with the DAO. I think it applies in certain cases it doesn't. I mean, even in our case, there needs to be like the scientist buy-in in order for this thing to work, right? So like that, and that's sort of like why we started with like gathering the scientists and having them, create their profiles and basically supplying their like research and evidence that this whole thing like might even work, right? So I think like for DAOs, at some point there's an inflection point where things might take off depending on whatever industry. But like specifically in the context of what we're doing, I don't think there's ever been a time where you could create a DAO or a DRO in our case to, our ultimate goal is to minimize time to interventions. And we're doing that by distributing the cost, risk, and ownership of basically the IP of drugs. It's really crazy. So, like I said, I mean, there has to be a certain buy-in from that industry that you're going after first. And I just don't think it'll work for every industry, but I think it actually, the DAO model is like is a very new, radical, and incredible way of sort of aligning everyone's incentives and striving for the same thing. And with drilling deep into the actual like technology and automation, it allows you to bypass a whole bunch of bullshit. And I think that's incredible.
Can we say DROs bypassing bullshit as
Sure.
a new tagline?
Yeah, let's use that.
Okay, we'll have a couple of questions at the end, but I'll just ask my last one, and I'll get you guys to do a very quick pitch to the audience based on this question. So if we were building an anti-rivalrous commons together, and you could pitch a room full of powerful people on what they should be focusing their energy, their work on, how would you pitch them? It's a tough one.
Can you define anti-rivalrous commons?
Felipe, who wrote this question. So let's just skip that part and say, define anti-rivalrous commons for us, Felipe.
Rivalrous commons is sort of all of these non-marginal cost goods we are creating that we profit by giving them away for free as a community. Does that work? Should I try again?
You got it.
One good example is Decentralized Thriving, the book, which is in the shirt from Kate. Right? All of these writers, either like let's say 60% of them wrote specific articles for the book, 40% of them had already written these articles before.
Yeah.
By putting them together in the strategy that they were put together in the book, they gain relative value that is larger than them alone. So the whole of the system is more than the sum of the parts because of the whole force structure level that is the poem in the middle of the shirt. Under the white sky, agency comes of age, feathered together by doers and deeds. Right. This book is free to give away. And it's more valuable the more we give it away.
Yeah.
That's the interactive
Okay,
Yeah.
so basically, if you were pitching the room to work on something, what would you pitch them to do to spend their energy on one of your projects or something that you've seen that's really important? That's the question.
I mean, I'm gonna like half not answer that question, but like to me, DAOs are fundamentally a coordination technology, right? I've had the privilege of participating in a couple of active DAO experiments this year. The trend this year has been very sort of pragmatic, terse code for security purposes on chain. And this very interesting effect happens where most of the time the members of the DAO are actually interacting either in real life or in some kind of internet forum. But my point is that they're interacting person to person. And most of the interaction, most of the coordination happens off-chain, and only like a little bit of the coordination finally happens at the end when they vote on something that they've been discussing for hours and days and weeks. And what that says to me is that, again, this is like the use case is so pervasive, right? Like because we can think of so many different areas where humans can coordinate. If I were to pitch, I guess, like working on something, like pick the most favorite case where that's important to you, where people coordinate, right? This could be like in New York, like a lot of people live in a roommate situation, right? When you and 3 other roommates have to coordinate on paying rent, that's a coordination game and a coordination situation. And you can write a DAO for that. You can write a DAO for, I don't know, electing the president of the United States if you wanted to. But I actually think that you know, the more local use cases are the more interesting. So pick the most interesting use case that matters to your location, to your life, to your like immediate surroundings, I think, and work on that.
Great answer. Thank you. Well done.
I would tell them 2 things. First, buy crypto. Whatever you're buying, Bitcoin and Ethereum, you'll see this coordination take place once you join the system. Once you realize that this currency that I just used is created by a large group of people without like one ruler, I think this will kind of open your mind. And the second one would be to follow your passion and don't just work for a boss or a corporation or anything, and really take a step back and be like, hey, what do I want to achieve for myself and the surrounding and the things surrounding me, and just slowly start with that. And that hobby can, with the tools we have now, pretty quick spiral into your real work or whatever you will call it.
Great. I have 2 dreams that I'm working on right now. One is we need a mechanism for startups, different projects, to be able to exit to community ownership, right? Community ownership rather than exiting to more investor ownership, no offense, to put investors in their place and make sure that the destination of the projects that we put our heart and soul and creativity in is the community of people who make them valuable, and those become owners of what they've created. It's going to require some interesting creativity, policy work, so forth, but this should be possible. Second, an app store for governance. We need a much broader palette of available options. Right now, most online communities are governed like little feudal fiefdoms, right? Facebook groups, everything. It's all, the whole model is feudalism, right? We need to create a norm where a much broader range of governance techniques are available to people, are usable, have beautiful experiences behind them and in front of them, and rebuild that democratic know-how in our online communities. If you want to help, let me know. Oh, you got mine.
I got it.
Did you want to respond, Jake? I saw you. No.
You want to respond?
No offense taken.
Well, I pray to God that social networks sort of implement some sort of DAO framework. I think that's very obvious. You know, with what Facebook is trying to do with like Libra, who the hell knows how that's going to work out. But I think inevitably, whatever you want to call it, a DAO, I think like 5 or 10 years or maybe even sooner, I think there will be DAO frameworks within our government systems right now. Because it's becoming very clear that there's way too many clowns, and people are realizing that this whole sort of corrupt sort of voting mechanism is not really working anymore. So that's sort of my half answer.
That's a good answer. More DAOs in the public sector, not just private. Yeah. Okay. I think we're at time, but if Philippe's not here, so let's just keep going if you're interested. Does anyone have one question? Please.
Hi, so great panel. This question is for Nathan, but I guess I would like to hear everyone's response. So at the beginning, you sort of mentioned that you know governance is kind of thin on the ground, and you want to adopt more patterns from the world outside. And you know, I guess my question is, to what extent do you think that just putting it on the blockchain, as it were, is the answer? And to what extent do you think that we should hold out for new mechanisms that we haven't seen before? To what extent that's the prize? Because like you've seen cooperatives and how empowering it can be to be a part of these things. And you mentioned the unions of the early 20th century, and I've been involved in cooperatives. But unfortunately, the thing that you realize is that the process of governing, you know, the parliamentary procedure, the Roberts rules, is quite tedious and quite alienating. And so, what ends up happening is a lot of people just say, it's not for me, I don't want to do that. And then you have sort of this sort of like separation where then some people are drawn to the power, just like with the unions. What happened was that people rose to the top and they realized they had more in common with the bosses they were meant to be fighting against and less their membership, and the whole thing kind of fell apart. So, I worry that putting it on the blockchain will just kind of we'll retell that story again and again. And so ultimately, maybe we have to hold out for new mechanisms that allow for new kinds of decision making. We can't just take what we've done before and bring it onto the blockchain. But what do you think?
I think the tension of democratic enterprise is always one of figuring out the cost of governance as opposed to the efficiencies of accountable democracy, right? And I think we're in a moment where our democratic institutions, right, have atrophied and lost the efficiency and gained, so we associate democracy with more work. Democracy should be more effective. It should be more accountable. It should be a more powerful tool. And that's, I think, the opportunity that we have before us. We're in a digital, globally connected world. We need digital, globally connected democracy. And I think when we do that right, we're going to have more effective governance than the alternative, because it's going to be accountable. On the question of on-chain, off-chain, I think that's really interesting. And actually a research project I'm kind of in the design stages for, I'd love any input if you have any, is looking at the relationship between on-chain activity in the current, exploratory governance DAOs, right, and the off-chain community. I think there's an element, and a lot of people here are part of this, so you know what I'm talking about, where a lot is happening that's not on-chain, that for which credit is given to the chain, right? There's a lot of people doing a lot of emotional labor, doing a lot of curation labor, doing the kind of relationship work, organizing a conference like this, moderating a panel like this, that is not getting the respect it deserves for the kinds of communities that are operating so far. And I think we have a lot to learn from what's going on off-chain now when we design our systems, whatever relationship they have with chains.
Anyone else want to respond? One other person, or are we good to go?
I think that's an excellent observation. And really, again, fits in with my observation that a lot of the governance that happens in DAOs that are actually deployed today is not on-chain. There's also, like, if you read a lot of the debates about whether governance should be on-chain or off-chain, and there's a fair body of literature on that these days on Medium, especially if you read like Vitalik on that. There's actually very distinct technical reasons why being on-chain is bad, or why like on-chain automatic upgrades of nodes are bad. That defaults are really powerful, and like automating that on-chain is a bad thing. And at the end of the day, like blockchain is a social technology in every way, right? It works on a distributed network run by individuals, not governments, usually not corporations, usually. And I think if you want to think about it in the context of DAOs, I would think about it like the chain is the settlement layer for all of the decisions that are made like elsewhere, right?
Okay, that's all we have time for. But Jake, Luke, Nathan, Michael, thanks so much for coming on this panel. It was fun.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.